Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. It is January 6th, and we are in 2021. And I hope everybody just thinks that 2021 just snapped like something brand new, spanking new. And I am so excited to be re-hosting the Eating at a Meeting podcast in the new year. Got a lot of great guests lined up. On this show, we talk about all things food and beverage, and with experts that have in different aspects of food and beverage, from doctors and dietitians to farmers to chefs to eaters. And to kick off the year, I have a guest who I'm so excited about. I actually was on her podcast last year. And so I'm excited to bring her here to talk about what her expertise is, which is around food bullying. Michele Payn, CSP, connects people and the science of food and farming as the principal of Cause Matters Corporation. She is the award-winning author of Food Bullying and Food Truths from Farm to Table and has a third book called No More Food Fights. She hosts the Food Bullying podcast, which I was on last year, and has earned her certified speaking professional designation. She resides with her city slicker husband and cow-loving daughter, that's a big combination there, on a small farm in central Indiana. She connects conversations around the food plate at causematters.com and via social media through her handles, and I'll put that up there for everybody to see. Welcome to the show in 2021, Michele.
Well, thanks, Tracy. It's such a delight to be here and very excited to have to be back into action with makeup and nice clothes and all that after the holiday break. Isn't that the truth?
Exactly. Everybody's sitting around in their pajamas, their holiday pajamas, and just not doing anything. So yes, it's really good to be back and to refocus what we're doing and or continue to doing what we're doing. So I'm excited. The work that you do is so interesting and so different when we're talking about food and beverage. And, I posted that you were going to speak on food bullying, and my friend Margaret, chimed in. I'm so excited about this. And in my food allergy world, dietary needs world, food bullying is very, very prevalent.
Yes.
And from kids to adults. And I've personally witnessed it as an adult, against another adult, and it's very, very challenging. But before we get into what that is, I actually really want to understand and you share with the audience, you've been doing this for 20 years. Can you talk about how you got there and, what connections around the food plate means?
Sure. I started my business, Cause Matters Corporation, 20 years ago in this May, which is really hard to believe. And if we can make it through 2021, maybe I can make it for another 20 years, who knows? But I essentially started to help give farmers a voice, give a voice to the people who feed the world. And it's extended beyond that over the last decade in particular, but even before that, to help people around the plate understand where their food comes from, and also to help farmers understand others' perspectives, such as dietitians, chefs, consumers, and whatnot. So connecting people around the food plate is about reaching across the plate and understanding different perspectives. And once upon a time, I would say shaking hands. I'm trying to get my hand up there. We're not doing that so much these days, but it is about the opportunity to look across the plate and find commonalities in the middle. Because clearly food allergies is a huge opportunity for bullying. Food allergies is largely unknown to the population that does not have food allergies. I've learned about it over the years because of dietitian friends and through speaking with people like yourself that have food interests. So to me, food should be about celebration, not condemnation. It should be about those connections rather than the guilt that seems to be happening. And it most certainly should not be about bullying.
Yeah, 100%. And the condemnation and the rolling of the eyes, and just because you choose to eat a specific way or must eat a specific way is not something that you should be made fun of for or put in the corner. And that even goes with religious-based practices. I did an event, I guess it was actually 2019, and the legal team for my client was like, well, you can't pass on the information about the guests who are halal and kosher and maybe it was 2019, because they may be targeted for that.
Right.
And that's scary in and of itself as well.
Yeah.
Different form of that bullying. So it's a challenge. So kind of define food bullying. What does that mean?
Food bullying is really about taking away choice, and it can be choice taken away at the grocery store, in a restaurant, at a meeting. It can be taking personal choice away, and it can also be taking choice away at the farm level. Food bullying centers around creating emotionalism and confusion in the brain, and it basically is making people feel guilty about the nutrition choices that they seek. So food bullying can take on many different forms. When I first started doing my research for my last book, I was shocked because I had any number of friends that reached out from the food allergy world and would tell me stories such as, my coworker knows that I am deathly allergic to peanuts, and will open up a bag of peanuts and put them in a bowl before I come into the cubicle and have a meeting. I was dumbfounded. To the parents in the classroom who are insensitive to other students that have food allergies, to the eye rolling that you had mentioned and whatnot. So that is certainly one form of food bullying. Another form of food bullying is leading people to believe that certain labels are superior when in fact they're not measurable whatsoever, such as farm-raised, natural, or sustainable food. Clean food would also fall into that. Immune boosting food is another one. A superfood is another one. Drives me nuts, especially in the pandemic today when people already live in so much uncertainty and fear. And the one thing that I would love for people to understand is that every farm matters. And, every meal matters, every guest matters, well, every farm matters. And there are people behind your food that are doing the best they can to raise that food.
That's such a good point. And when we were seeing in the beginning of the pandemic that farmers were throwing their food away, retailing it back into the ground or throwing away milk, I mean, they're losing their livelihood because because they didn't have a place to send it to convention centers and schools and things like that. And so getting to know your farmer and getting to know what their practices are just as important as buying the food at the grocery store. And because you get to know them as a person, and it's like slow food has the mantra of good for the planet, good for the people, and good for everybody who's growing that food, right? Fair food, fair trade, equal wages. And it means it's good for everybody in that whole food chain, which is part of that whole food bullying and understanding where your food comes from.
It is, but I'm also a huge fan of knowing how a movement is defined, or knowing how a label is defined and measured. And I'm not against slow food. I enjoy cooking family meals and have done so since I was a very young child. But is there really a definition of slow food? And my premise is that just as every eating choice is important in protecting people from allergens, understanding every farming practice and at least allowing farmers to choose the practice that best works for their family is important. You had mentioned the beginning of the pandemic when, yes, thousands and thousands of tons of milk was dumped. Millions of pounds of vegetables were wasted. It was truly the most disruptive event of our lifetime in the food chain. And I can tell you personally that it's more than just the economic waste that impacted farmers, because yes, clearly those products are a commodity market, whether you like that term or not. You have to have the demand in order to receive the price. And clearly there are hundreds of hours put into a gallon of milk, and the costs that are there, and there's no margins in milking cows anyhow, profit margins. But it's beyond that. It's the pride in a product and pride in feeding the world. And when you see your product dumped, it creates an angst that is difficult to describe.
Oh, I can only imagine. I mean, it's the labor, the toll that went into putting that from seed to tilling it and growing it. And, and when I lived in Atlanta, and I worked a food festival, but when when the devastation hits because of flooding, farmers' whole crops are destroyed because of that. But the pandemic has done that in a different way. And it's very disheartening to see that they don't have the support that they need and the infrastructure to help them to get that back.
It certainly has improved, and we're to the point now where clearly the food supply has always been stable. There's been hiccups caused because of processing, because of the pandemic, and so forth. But the good news is we live in a country where we have more than ample food.
Yes.
The bad news is that we have a world that needs to be fed. And having worked internationally a great deal and seen hungry people, it's one of the reasons why I adamantly believe that farmers deserve choice to increase production and provide food to those people.
That's really good point. And the choice, I like that term, because we have the choice to grow the food that we want the way that we want it. We have the choice to choose, do we want to eat that food, whichever food that we choose to eat, but there's also, medical reasons that we need to eat specific ways, or religious-based reasons. But the choice is ours, and we live in a country that does promote us being able to have the choice.
We do, but unfortunately, there's a lot of guilt and bullying that's removing choice. So a couple different examples. One may surprise people. The GMO-free label is what I consider to be one of the biggest bullies in the grocery store, and here's why. There's only about a dozen products that are approved to be genetically engineered, which is a very precise, it's actually an amazingly cool technological science. But there's only about a dozen foods. And that GMO-free label is actually a bit of a money-making scheme where companies have to pay to have that put on their products. So, for example, that gallon of milk, it may say GMO-free. Well, all milk is GMO-free. Just as the bag of miniature peppers, I get really annoyed in the grocery store. And if I have a choice, I will always buy the package of food with the least amount of labeling on it. I will buy the simplest, plainest package that there is, because I happen to believe that the only labels that really matter are the nutrition facts label, and then of course the allergens. And that's something a lot of people don't understand that are required to be on there. But the nutrition facts label is the singular best place. And it's that boring black and white box that has no sex appeal. That's on your food to refer to, but it's a great place to get the truth about the nutrition that's in the food you're purchasing.
Yeah, I was listening to Marion Nestle. I'm gonna, her book. Where did it go? Let's Ask Marion. Years ago when I took my certified health coaching program, and she was talking about how I think it was in the 80s, the food manufacturers sued for freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. To be able to put whatever they want on the label, on their food packaging, except the only place they can't alter is that white, that white box.
Yes.
And so, you may say it's got less sugar in it, but unless you go look at the back, they're not telling you that they just doubled the amount of salt or whatever. So kind of like with that food bullying, I totally understand what that means with the labeling, because it does make you want to feel better about something that you're eating when it's not necessarily better than the one that's right next to it.
Yeah, it was interesting. When I wrote the book, I found that food in the United States alone is a $5.75 trillion business.
Wow.
That is big business. And agriculture is a part of that. I'm not condemning business, to be clear, but I think it's really interesting when you step back and you look at the grocery store, this is restaurants aside, is that there are about 40,000 products in the average grocery store in the States. 40,000 products to sort through. And I don't know what's your shopping experience right now. Mine is pretty much electronic, but I'm not a big fan of going to the grocery store because I get so aggravated because of all this background noise that's happening just looking at the foods. But what I think is fascinating, if you figure that there is an average of 5 claims on each food product, that's 200,000 claims that we have to sort through.
Wow.
When we go through the grocery store. So 200,000 claims combined with the fact that only 1.5% of our population lives on a farm or ranch today, that's a lot of disconnected people. And what I wrote about in food bullying is when you're disconnected, there is a distrust. Yay, there it is.
There it is.
So If you're disconnected, which we clearly are, 75% of people in the States haven't been on a farm in the last 5 years, according to one study out of my alma mater. We're disconnected, so there's this distrust, and with distrust comes fear. The best example I can give of that model is if somebody that you did not know or did not, at this point, you weren't really close to, they came to your door today and knocked on your door and asked to come in, would you let them in your home? Likely not.
Right.
Because you're disconnected from where they've been. You're distrustful of what their health status and if they can bring the virus into your home, and therefore you're fearful. And the bullies prey on that fear just as the same as fear is very real in the school system. And I certainly am not saying food bullying is more important than that, but it's the same basic tenet. Those bullies prey on fear. When they see your weakness, they will prey on that. And it is very clear that neuromarketing is targeting people to produce emotions and confusion around food and misperceptions, quite frankly, about how food is produced.
That's mind-boggling.
Well, and one of the cool things in the book, and my degrees are in animal science and agriculture communications, and granted, I've worked in the food business for a long time, but I never thought I'd be studying neuroscience, right?
Right.
And when I wrote the book, there's a lot of neuroscience and psychology in there, and it's fascinating to me because it's become very obvious, and I'm sure you run into this, Tracy. Our brains are very clearly being manipulated about food, about science. And you can see that even during the pandemic, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and I was listening to your podcast, and I know she was a guest twice. I think it was one of your very first ones. The woman who uses food stamps, right?
Yes.
And we've got a lot more people using food stamps and looking for food at food banks these days because of the pandemic. And just the feeling that she has by not buying organic, that she feels guilty from not buying her kids organic food. Whereas, if it's local or not even if it's local, but where that food comes from, and that's an added stress from just even trying to put food on her table than trying to go to the grocery store and not buying in that section that's purple or has these, non-GMO signs, things like that.
Right. It's about the guilt. Diane is who you're talking about. She's actually a formerly homeless mom from Massachusetts. Fascinating story. And we talked a lot about how food bullying has led to an increase in food prices because of regulation. So as an example, cage-free eggs. And we're not going to have enough time to get into all the different ways that eggs can be produced. But again, when I go to the grocery store, I buy eggs with the least amount of labels on the package. I buy generic eggs. I do not buy cage-free eggs. I do not buy omega-enriched eggs. I buy eggs because an egg is an egg is an egg, and science clearly proves it. But what Diane highlights is how our food prices have been increased, which for the segment of the population, which is growing at this point, that lives in food insecurity, that's huge. A study out of Cornell actually showed that egg prices increased, I believe it was 7 or 8%, don't quote me on that, as a result of the legislation that was around hen housing. And I think that's really sad. Yeah. Again, food should be about nourishment, and it should be about tradition. And there should not be guilt. People shouldn't feel guilty that are at a meeting feeling as though they have to have the right labels on the food that's in there. Because of course, if they're labeled adequately with what's required as far as the allergens and whatnot, that's important. But it's not important to label everything that it's the most she food possible. And I'm being a little sarcastic about it, but it aggravates. I'm allergic to that. Let's put it that way.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's good. I mean, that reminds me of a chef in Atlanta who he was probably one of the first to do the farm to table concept. And he's like, my eggs are from this farm, and my eggs are, my kale is from this farm and whatever, and on their board that they would put it, which I do like because it's showing that he's talking to those farmers and having relationships with them. But he ended up taking it down because everyone else started doing it as well, and it wasn't a increased service level. And so I do like the idea of that restaurateur and that chef knowing who they got their food from, having a relationship with that farmer. But does that necessarily mean it needs to be a higher level of a service? Does that need to be the higher level service? Does that make sense?
Well, that's a good question. And I don't know, because I don't think that story should be told for marketing. I think it should be
Right.
told for truth. Uh,
Yeah.
there's so much mistruth out there, and clearly the farm to table movement is significant.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never downplay that. I think it's lovely. I go pick our blueberries. We go to apple orchards. But I also buy those from the national brands with absolutely no guilt whatsoever. Because at the end of the day, a farmer is a farmer is a farmer. And whether I know that face individually, which I'm fortunate I know thousands of them, but that's not really the deal. The deal is knowing the story of how the food is raised and why farmers use the practices that we do. So when you hear something or you read something such as antibiotic free, I would strongly suggest, and it's one of the tenets that I cover in the food bullying book, use why as your fear filter. Why is this restaurant making this claim?
Right.
Why is this label making this claim? Why does it matter? And then in turn, to really know what your own standards are. I will contend all day, every day, that if you know your own health, ethical, environmental, and social standards, that you can protect yourself against food bullying. In conversations in particular, but also when you go out shopping. Because Tracy, I'm sure that your idea of, for example, environmental standards is likely very different than mine. And that's okay.
Right.
You know, we all get to make choices. We live in the United States of America, and we don't need to be judging each other quite as much as we do. And that goes beyond food, but I'll stop there.
Well, and where I live in a small town in eastern North Carolina, and when I moved here for reasons other than just normal, in selecting a place, my parents live here, but I go to the farmers market every Saturday morning, and I know Stephen and I know Fred and I know oh my gosh, now they're all going to escape my brain. But my farmers, so I'm buying my peppers and I'm buying my tomatoes and all of that directly from them. And I've actually been out to Stephen's farm. Fred
great.
actually does vertical farming. So she is actually not growing, like Stephen is traditional farming in the ground and all of that, but she's doing different kinds of hydroponics.
Right.
And and her food is delicious. And but she's like, I go to the market. She's like, hey, how you doing today, Tracy? And when I post my pictures on Instagram, I'm always tagging them because I've gotten to know my farmers. And same thing with in Atlanta, Lori and Will Moore from Moore Farms and Friends, and Charlotte, from Riverview Farms. And I like to buy from them because I know how they're growing it. I know their practices. And I believe that. That doesn't mean I'm not going to go buy the national brand at the grocery store either. But when they've got something, because it also makes it, quote unquote, forces me eat what's in season.
Yes. Yeah. And it's great that you're developing those relationships. And I would encourage anyone out there, if you have questions about why food is grown the way that it is, contact me at causematters.com, email me, contact Tracy. She can get hold of me. And I have a whole list of farmer and advocate blogs that are listed on my website as well. Just to give you some additional connections, because there's not just one type of farming that's right. Just like there's not one type of eating that's right.
Right, exactly. And there's all kinds of conversations about, seafood and all of that and how that plays into it. So it is very discombobulating. And how do you know what that means? And they are third-party people that have, like you said, developed them for marketing reasons.
Yes. There's a lot of, quote, third party, people, unquote.
Yes, exactly. So one of the questions that, well, maybe I think we've already kind of answered it, but, the question that I always ask everybody is, what does a safe, inclusive, and sustainable food and beverage experience look like to you? And I liked your answer because you said understanding the source, the science, and the system.
Yes.
That's in place to protect you from food. including allergens. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that means?
Sure. That's the highest level of food understanding that I actually covered on in a food buying hierarchy that's very similar to Maslow's hierarchy, if you remember that from psychology. So knowing the source, knowing the science, and knowing the system comes down to knowing the source of where your food comes from. And that clearly is the farm. That doesn't mean you need to go to the farmer's market. If you do, kudos to you. It doesn't mean that you need to go to a farm per se of every type of food that you buy. It just simply means that that you have a general connection with agriculture, the farmers, the people, and those that explain, again, why do we do what we do? Mm-hmm. And then knowing the science in today's time, it is critically important that we have a better idea of science. A study out of Oklahoma State several years ago showed that about 72%, I believe, of people, maybe it was 69%, but it was more than 2/3 of the population believe that our food should be labeled if it has DNA in it. I want you to think about that. Yes, I said DNA, which, by the way, all of your food has hormones in it. All of your food has genes in it. And that's okay, because you do too. And that's the way it's supposed to be. It's required for life. And I'm being a little sarcastic here, but there is so much misinformation about science out there. And science is a process. Science is not a definitive answer. And yes, science does change because, again, it's a process. It's an evolution, if you will. And I think it's critically important in a time of a global pandemic that we do a better job of understanding science, not only about food, but about everything. And then knowing the system. So if you don't know the science and you don't know the source, the third recommendation I would have is get to know the system that's in place to protect your food. USDA, FDA, EPA in this country do a remarkable job of having the process and protocol in place, the definitions and the measurements. And I spent a whole lot of time when I was writing Food Bullying, reviewing the label claims that are out there. And there's a lot of them. Yes. And in chapter 16 of the book, I believe, is where we cover allergens as well as the nutrition facts label. So you can certainly take a look in there. But the whole point is to know the source, know the science, or know the system, and you will feel so much better about your food and where it comes from and why it keeps you safe.
That's awesome. And food needs to keep us safe. And it's the one thing that we all share in common, right? Because we all have to eat, but we all have to appreciate where our food comes from and appreciate, how Michele eats and how Tracy eats for whatever reason that we eat that way. But we also have to appreciate, the farmer that grew that. And it was oh my gosh, one of the other episodes that I did is, and now it's escaping me of who that was, but it's really appreciating. It was actually the one that landed yesterday in the podcast with my friend Doreen Cumberford. But the preparation, not just from the farmer, but the person who's cooking that food for you and putting it on that plate, and appreciating the time and celebrating. And you said that too, is celebrating when it gets put in front of you and enjoying that, and removing all barriers and all bullying, and condemnation of any sort when you're sitting down to enjoy a meal with someone.
Yes. At the end of the day, you should be worried about, is this food nourishing me? Mm-hmm. And is this food safe? Right. And that looks different to a lot of people, but let's get back to the basics and really count on food for nourishment and family tradition and celebration, because it should absolutely not be about the bullying and condemnation, just as you said, Tracy.
Well, and that's a whole nother conversation that we could go into, but on the nutrition, how nutrition dense is the food. A lot of that food in that packaging that you said going to the grocery store, it's not nutrition dense. It's lacking, but it's marketing ploys to get you to buy it.
Well, it can be, but let's take, for example, carbohydrates. A lot of people like to condemn carbohydrates right now because, and I understand certainly if you have a wheat allergy or if you are celiac, which very, very, very low percentage of the population is, but carbohydrates are required by our body. They're not a bad thing. And any registered dietitian, nutritionist is the only place you should be getting your nutrition information, by the way. But any of them that have been on the podcast or that I've interviewed for the books, all very clearly say you need to eat carbohydrates. They're not bad. I happily shop in the center of the grocery store and I have no problem with it. And I think that's one thing that's changed during the pandemic is people have finally started to realize that preserved foods are okay. Canned food, frozen food, dried food, especially fruits and vegetables, are perfectly fine.
Yep. Canned foods are some of them are good. I don't like them when they're canned. Some of them are canned, but it's just my personal flavor taste.
Sure.
Right?
Well, exactly. It's about choice.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, canned foods and frozen foods are just as good as the fresh ones, especially when they're not in season. You know,
It's interesting because we do not eat enough fruits and vegetables in this country. That's not a news flash to anyone. And it's noteworthy, I think, that food bullying by lists such as the Dirty Dozen, which is complete BS, have led to fewer people eating fruits and vegetables that live in food insecurity because they're afraid if they don't buy fresh organic produce that it's unhealthy for their family. That is inaccurate. And canned foods, frozen foods actually are picked at the height of nutritional value. So sometimes they're more nutritional than the fresh stuff that's sat around for a few weeks, losing their nutritional value. So just know that you can shop in all parts of the grocery store. It's about balance. And do I eat some of those unhealthy foods? Well, I do. And then I go to the gym because I love red wine and I love chocolate. And that's my choice and nobody's going to change it.
Well, and that's true. I mean, it is about balance. And I was talking to somebody that's doing a fasting, intermittent fasting. I'm like, I can't not eat until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And, you know, it just depends on that. Okay. So we just got a question from Nancy. So the Dirty Dozen isn't a valid list?
Yes. So good question, Nancy. Thank you for bringing that in. The Environmental Working Group is responsible for the Dirty Dozen list. I would strongly suggest that you look up how they measure the residues because it is a completely different level than what the EPA does. And all of the National Toxicology and Chemical Associations say that it is inaccurate. In other words, it's comparing a grapefruit to a grape. You can make fear, you can bully people, you can create scares out of all sorts of misinformation. And that list actually, unfortunately, is filled with misinformation. A great resource if you want to know about residues in food is the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, or you can certainly go to FDA and USDA and see how they actually measure residues. But what you need to know is that there is a significant amount of research, and I mean volumes of research about residues in food.
Well, and just wash your food.
Exactly. Right? And don't wash it with soap.
Right.
That's one of the things I was dumbfounded. Apparently people don't know, but there in food bullying, there's several different links to different places to find valid food information, including what the food expiration dates really mean, which is not what you think it means because they're not regulated, by the way. And also finding out where your food is processed and also finding out how you're supposed to protect your food, which does not involve soap and water if you're washing your fruits and vegetables. So
my dad did that once. I'm like, yeah, we're not doing that again.
Yes.
Yeah, don't do that. But do not wash your chicken because from food safety perspective, that spreads the germs all over your sink.
Yeah, the recommendations, the actual links, and there are fascinating resources, especially from FDA. I'm not going to find it off the tip of my hands, but the links are in the book as far as what all of that means and what you should be doing, best practices.
Okay, awesome. Well, and I'm going to take over here and I'm going to put all of your, I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste in here the comments of how everybody can get a hold of you. All right, Nancy just posted, I do wash, but what about what's within the fruit and vegetable? That's more concerning. I can clean the outside, but I've lived by that list for a while.
Sure, Nancy. And I certainly respect that that's important to you. And I'm glad you wash your fruits and vegetables. So here's what is largely misunderstood. Fruits and vegetables, plants naturally have chemicals. They're comprised of chemicals, just as you and I are. But they also naturally produce pesticides. You will never have a pesticide-free plant, regardless of what type of label you're buying it on. So it is also important, I think, that you understand that organic farmers are also also using pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides on their fields. They're just produced differently. One is not necessarily better than the other. Organic is about a production choice, not a nutritional claim. And the Dirty Dozen list basically is a fear-evoking list. And they planted the seed in your mind that it's wrong to buy food if it's on the Dirty Dozen list, that you have to buy the organic food. That is inaccurate. Because the residue is on food regardless. One, because it's natural in food, and two, it's needed to protect it. So the best example I can give is if you've ever grown tomatoes on your patio or roses, and you're happy, the plant's growing, everything's looking great, you're feeling super proud of it, and then all of a sudden those nasty white bugs arrive that creep all over the place. You know what I'm talking about? And then if it's a tomato plant, those big worms, those huge green worms that are disgusting. Right?
Yes, they are.
So what do?
Right. You cut the worm out and eat the tomato, or you throw the tomato?
No, you dust the plant, because if you're producing the plant, the worm is going to eat everything and destroy everything, right? So you either dust or you spray. That's why farmers use pesticides. That's why farmers try to help make sure that their plants are protected. And what's most important that you understand, and this gets back to knowing the system and knowing the science, is there is a system in place to protect you. You would have to drink a huge quantity of chemicals for it to impact you. And what you find on your fruits and vegetables has been very carefully measured and monitored so that it does not harm you. Chemicals aren't all bad. And a lot of people have been had fear created around that. Chemicals are required for life. You're made of them. I've made of them. Your plants are made of them. And that's okay.
Well, good. All right. Well, I think this has been a fabulous conversation. You already kind of answered there's so much to think about, and there's, and when we're looking at, meeting planners, ordering food and beverage, trying to chat with chefs and things like that. To me, the only thing that you really need to label for when you're putting that out is the allergens, and whether it's vegan or vegetarian for those individuals who choose to eat that way. And that, for medical reasons or for personal preferences, but we all just need to be more educated. And so definitely, where can they buy this book? On Amazon? There it is.
You can get Food Bullying on Amazon. If you want an author signed copy, you can go to my website, causematters.com, connect with me through social media at mpayn speaker. Love to hear from you. And Nancy, I'll tell you what, since you've done a great job of, there she commented, since you've done a great job, if you want to share your address with Stacy, I will send you a complimentary copy of Food Bullying, and it will have some of the different references in there. There are, I believe, 88 citations in the book, so that should give you lots of reading material. And good luck on your garden.
Yeah. Okay, so you kind of answered this question, but what is your favorite food and beverage?
My favorite beverage is red wine. And my favorite food is milk chocolate, not dark chocolate, but milk chocolate. And you can judge me all you want, and I don't really care. I also
judge you.
No, not you. I'm talking about anyone else. So those are my favorite foods. And I also I'm probably going to go have a spinach salad after this. And I love artichokes. I love fruits. Of course, I recommend any dairy product under the face of the earth, because I have cows right out that window there that appreciate your support.
Okay, two things on that is, one question, the commercial for the cows, the lactate cows, he's like, it's funny. He's like, these cows are going to get pissed off at you. But it's a funny ad. I don't even know who it's for. But the other one is artichokes. So I bought a can of artichokes the other day, and I was reading the label, and it says, once you open them, you have to eat them within 4 days. Why is that?
Well, it's like all fruits and vegetables. They'll go bad. And once they're exposed to oxygen, they're susceptible. So that's true with anything. I love my artichokes. I have a spinach artichoke dip that I add lots of cheese to. It's actually quite healthy. Milk chocolate lovers, yay! By the way, milk chocolate is the chocolate milk, I should say, is the best sports recovery drink there is out there. That is scientifically proven. And I also have a very competitive state-ranked cross-country runner, and she drinks chocolate milk all the time after she runs.
Wow, good to know.
Yes.
Okay, so it's just the fact that it's not like a regular, I guess it is a canned food. All right. But
artichoke? Yes.
Yeah, it was easy to consume in 4 days. I consumed them in 2 days.
Well, yes. So would you leave a can of I'm trying to think of another example, a can of green beans sitting around for 4 days? I mean,
no, I meant I could like undo it and then put it in the refrigerator. But I guess, even putting it in the refrigerator should stay. All right. I should still eat it within 4 days, which is fine. I don't want it to go to waste. So
yeah.
LA drinks her milk chocolate before she donates platelets.
Oh, that's awesome. Can't say I've heard that used, but that sounds like a great one.
So LA, I actually gave blood like 2 weeks ago. And before that, my iron levels had been a little bit low. So I made myself a whole humongous bowl of lentil soup to make sure that my iron levels were up. And it worked.
Uh-oh. Well,
yeah.
Spinach, steak, hamburger, great way to raise your iron levels.
Exactly. So, well, Michele, thank you so much. I have put your Instagram and your Twitter and your website addresses in the feed here so everybody knows how to get a hold of you. Awesome. But again, it's causematters.com. Michele Payn, award-winning author, farmer, entrepreneur, and certified speaking professional. Food Bullying this is the most recent one, right?
Correct. Yep.
Most recent book. And it's a good read. She also has a podcast called foodbullying.com. Foodbullying.com. So,
well, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Likewise. Happy New Year, everybody. All right. Let's